So, this morning, I wanted to do something that I've alluded to a few times before with little snippets here and there about the journey that I've been on for the past 10 years. So much of it, so much of the pivotal moments that I've had in my journey have come from connecting with Bill's class, Bill's lectures, and the resources that he's brought up over the course of, 7 years I think I've been coming here. And so let's start with one of Bill's traditions. No matter who you are or where you are on your spiritual journey, you are welcome here. So I'm basing some aspects of my story on this scripture, Luke 10, 38 to 42, using the version from the Message by Eugene Peterson. So here's how it goes. As they continued their travel, Jesus entered a village. A woman by the name of Martha welcomed him in and made him feel quite at home. She had a sister, Mary, who sat before the Master, hanging on every word he said. But Martha was pulled away by all she had to do in the kitchen. Later, she stepped in, interrupting them. Master, don't you care that my sister has abandoned the kitchen to me? Tell her to lend me a hand. The Master said, Martha, dear Martha, you're fussing far too much and getting yourself worked up over nothing. One thing only is essential, and Mary has chosen it. It's the main course, and it won't be taken from her. So I think I've said this before, but I have a fairly new relationship with Scripture. I was raised. If there was a religious tradition in my life, it was being Southern Baptist. My parents didn't go to church regularly, pretty much on holidays, and my grandparents are the ones that I sat in the pew with whenever I went to church. I sat between my grandmother and my grandfather. And I always had this sense inside of me that I couldn't connect with what the preacher was saying from the pulpit. It didn't feel right to me that we were being threatened, that we had to be perfect or we were going to, burn in hellfire. And some of the interpretations just didn't seem like the loving, understanding, open relationship to God that I saw in the lives of my grandparents. So it was hard for me to reconcile this message and this way of being that they are. Thankfully, they still are. So one of the things that I love about the spiritual direction program that I've been going at the Cynical is Father Philip Kirchhoff, who's a Jesuit. He is traveling a lot, but he resides in Toronto. He uses the Jesuit method of imaginative prayer, of really getting into the scripture and, as he puts it, wrestling with it until it makes sense, until it speaks to you in your life and you get an understanding of this specific scripture at that specific point in your life. And that's how you understand it and have a relationship with it. And that opened up to me this notion that I can read scripture without fear now. And so one of the ways that he has represented this scripture to us is through the conversation of contemplation versus action. Mary prayerfully hanging on every word and being present with the Master, and Martha being busy doing in the other room and kind of missing the point. That's one way I've heard that scripture interpreted. Another way that I've heard it, that Philip Kirchhoff brought to us, was that what if Mary's identity in God and her a way of being that was in the present moment at that time was to kneel at the Master's feet and listen? And what if Martha, who invited them in, her place was to host and serve? And where Martha got off track was that she took her eye off where her place was in that moment and compared herself to Mary. And that really hit me as far as how the ego jumps in and has us compare ourselves to somebody else. And it also says to me that we're not all supposed to be doing the same thing. Unity is not about uniformity. Unity is about us marrying a wide variety of differences and being unique and coming together as one, not all doing the same thing and being the same person. So in the world that we live in, it's really difficult for us to take enough time to connect with who we are and to be in the present moment. You know, we're rewarded by going fast. We're rewarded by staying in our head. Those are things that our culture really values. So as we're losing who we are, we tend to go faster. I think I've heard this quote from Rollo May, and then I've also heard that it came from Darwin, but that the human is the only being that actually runs faster the more lost they get. And I think that could be said of the culture that we live in. So my question is, who is willing to slow down enough to discover who we are in God, who our identity is in God, rather than through the lens of our ego and our competitive and comparison that we do. This is a graphic I've used in some of my talks recently, and it just represents to me some of the clutter that I get from the media that we're in, that we're incentivized to spend more money, to have a certain image, to compete. We're given this notion that there's scarcity, that we have to fight for what we want, and that we have to kind of bust through all of that to get to who we are at our core. So if all of this is going on in our lives, it's very difficult to sit still and hear the subtle movements of God in our lives, the subtle nudges that we get from sacred mystery. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but Parker Palmer and Francis, is it Buechner? They, in the book, Let Your Life Speak, there's a quote that I really latched onto, and that is that vocation is the place where your deep gladness meets the world's deepest need. I don't know if anybody else knows what these characters are, but we have a 5-year-old daughter, and that's why we know. But these are My Little Ponies, and when our daughter started watching them a couple of years ago, our son, who's 12, was 10 at the time, and he had watched an episode with me where they show these ponies who, when they get to probably around a teenage year, if you're watching them and you know they're in their development, they're coming of age, and they're discovering who they are in the world. What's their unique gift or identity? And as they start to discover what their gifts are, a little cutie mark shows up on their hip, and that stays with them for the rest of their lives. And that's their identity, but it's a little mark that shows up on their hip. And my 10-year-old at the time said, why can't a cutie mark just appear on me? He said, I think as people, we spend our entire lives trying to figure out who we are. Why can't we just have that show up? He said, I want to know what my special gift is now. And it reminded me of, the work that I had done with a group that I started. It's Cool to Care, for teenagers who were very frustrated that they were beginning to understand who they are in the world, and they had a desire to use these passions and gifts to change the world. Many of them were around 8 or 9 when 9/11 happened. And I think that particularly I know 2 of them actually watched it play out on TV at that formative part of their lives. And they felt a responsibility to make a difference in the world before they inherited the world. And so they were very frustrated that they felt they didn't feel empowered to make a difference. They wanted to volunteer in organizations, and they were too young to volunteer without a parent. And so anyway, I was working with them to try to help them find themselves and connect them with resources in the community so that they could begin to make a difference. So one of the things that, looking back on that period in my life now, I realized that I was actually wanting the same for myself. I was at a point in my life reaching, I call it an early midlife crisis, but, I wanted the same thing that they wanted, and I could connect with that feeling that they had. And in some sense, some of the drive that I had to do it was really a projection, because I wanted to be able to do the same thing that they were asking to do. So one of the things that happened to me at that point in my life was I was so passionate about working with these kids. I was also working a full-time job and traveling some, and I had young children, and there was too much on my plate, and I felt like the full-time job that I had seemed to, in my mind, was priority one. You got to bring home the bacon, right? Or you can't do all these other things. So that was the first thing that I needed to do. Well, I shouldn't say that. Kids, that goes without saying. The family and the kids were first. The full-time job, and then the nonprofit, community service work was last. But my identity, my passion, this drive and longing that I had was for that, which was last. And I got really frustrated. I got really burned out. I wasn't the wife, the mother, the employee, or the mentor that I wanted to be. I was really struggling to do all of those things at once. And I began drinking too much. I started checking out in a way. I was giving up. It was hard to see from the outside, because a lot of my friends will even say, I never saw that you were losing it, because I kept all the plates spinning. I kept moving, I kept them spinning, but inside I was spinning out of control. I started getting apathetic. I started building walls and losing contact with my heart. You can't, I think I've heard Bill say this before, you can't just turn off one part of your emotions and not turn everything off. So I started to really feel like a zombie. And so recently I've thought about this, about why are zombies so popular in our culture? And I think, is it possible that there's some artist out there who's gone through a transformation and is looking back and saying, look at these fools walking around, they act like they're already dead, they're disconnected, they're gobbling up intellect, they're eating brains, and they're losing their members, and so they're feeling disempowered, they're victims, and so that's the way I felt. And so in the worst part of it, one night that I had way too much to drink and had a series of terrible decisions that I made, I ultimately I wanted to die, and I started figuring out how I could follow that through. And I was wandering around downtown, and I came to this spot, and I just stopped. I just stood there, and try not to cry. But that is where that transcendent moment that Bill talks about happened to me. I had felt just utterly trapped. I made so many bad decisions. I didn't know how I was possibly going to face the consequences. And so all of a sudden, I prayed to God to just end it for me. And what I heard was, if you're willing to lose everything, to completely let go of who you are, even of existing, why don't you start over with me? Why don't you let me help you see who you are and just take the next step with me? And because of that experience, all of a sudden I had no fear. I was not scared of living. I had not been scared of dying, but for the first time I was not afraid of truly living. And so I went from that strength to facing the consequences that had to be faced. And I had an assurance and a foundation of really wanting to be who I am in God and finding a way to make that happen. So who are you? How do you know who you are? Where do you find the clues? And are there people in your life that help you discover this? Are there people in your life that help you be that person? So as I started to come out of this hole that I was in and deal with the consequences, my husband and I each started seeing a Jungian analyst, and mine really listened me into taking the next step and seeing a different way of being in the world, and making choices that came from this new identity that I felt that I had. It wasn't necessarily a new identity. It was who I'd always been, but I had an awareness of it. And around the same time, we started coming to Ordinary Life, and began shedding some of the old fears I had about the Southern Baptist upbringing that I had, and began to let go of some of the guilt and shame. I think I could because I had this sensation of being one with God and having that foundation, that I was able to be open to spirituality and religion. I met Holly Abel in here, and she listened me into being. I realized later that what she was doing was spiritual direction. She was hearing my story and being a companion with me and helping me see God, not just in the big moment, not just in that big slice, but in the little moments. Whenever I could be present, she helped me find those nudges and discover a way to keep in contact with who I am in just simple daily life moments. I ended up working with Holly for a year on Midtown Spirituality Center, and that was truly a gift. A friend of mine, Kathy, took me through a process that she did at the University of Houston. I think it was the University of Houston. She taught a journalism class, and at the end, she would help her students go through this process of developing their resume. And so she said, I think you'd enjoy this. So she took me through this process, and what you do is you make a list of all of the names anybody has ever called you, nicknames, whatever different names people have called you. You make a list, and you start connecting with what they mean to you and who said them and the connection that you have with that. And then you make a list of all the jobs that you've ever had, all the roles and responsibilities you've had in those jobs, and your hobbies. And again, you connect with each one and reflect on which ones bring you the most joy, which ones energize you rather than take away or exhaust you. And then she took me through this process of analyzing all of that and finding the common thread. And that really helped me discover that who I've always been existed in all of those little places that seemed fairly insignificant. But when you put them all together and look at it, you really can see that I'm not that different than I was when I was 5 or 6, and it helped connect there. And then I also learned about nonviolent communication in Ordinary Life. Jim and Jory Mansky came and taught about the process of Marshall Rosenberg's work, and my husband and I started going to those workshops. And for me, nonviolent communication has a lot of different gifts. It was a tool for conflict resolution in the 70s when Rosenberg was developing it. But it also is a way of connecting with all of our human needs and seeing the whole picture. We are making decisions that are meeting our needs, and having an awareness of all of those needs, I felt like was a good tool to keep me from getting out of balance. It was a tool for self-care. It's also a tool to not be passive-aggressive. If we know what it is we're seeking, we know what it is we want, we have an awareness of it, we can be more proactive about the strategies we use. So that really helped me feel empowered to make life choices that were going to support this identity that I have, and for being truly whole and not just spinning plates, if you will. As I became more and more aware of this longing that I had, this connection that I had when I was working with the teenagers still really existed in me. And I started having discussions with Bill and Sherry, Gail Williford, Judy Leatherwood-Smith. And I had this deep desire, because I was benefiting so much from these tools and resources, that I had this deep desire to bring a workshop here. I wanted to have a workshop called When Mama's Happy, and bring in Judy Wilbrat to teach an Enneagram session, have nonviolent communication, have someone teaching meditation, and to really empower moms who likely are spinning many plates as I was, to be empowered with these tools in hopes that no one else would have to spin so far out of control as I did. While I was talking about wanting to put on these workshops, I got an opportunity to go to lunch with a friend who I hadn't seen in a while, Jana, who's here. And we were casually having lunch, and she mentioned that she was doing a spiritual direction program with the Senecal. And I had heard about what a spiritual director, heard the term spiritual director, but I really didn't know what it meant. So I asked her to explain, and she started talking to me about what a spiritual director does. And I realized that's what I was doing with these teens. That was the work that I was doing with them. And I thought that's what I'm called to do, because that's where my heart feels the most alive. And after benefiting from it myself, I really felt like that quote, where your deepest gladness meets the world's deep needs, that hit hard in that moment. And Jana said, by the way, if you want to start this program, registration ends tomorrow. So I rushed to get the application in, and luckily Bill Curley gave me a recommendation letter within 24 hours, and off I went on this journey to become a spiritual director. So through the course of those 3 years, what I learned is that we have to keep practicing. It's not like that one slice of transcendence is going to keep me on my path. It's really about constantly practicing and constantly having people in your life who can walk with you like a spiritual director or soul companion that helps you see those nudges and helps you choose love over fear, to bring spirit into your daily life. So, and one of the things I was thinking about in doing spiritual direction is that sacred mystery self-corrects. So even if we have this clarity, even if we know what we're doing, we're still going to get off track. We get off track all the time. I do. And so God is always self-correcting. We may go this way, and God will course correct, and another opportunity will come up, or we'll get ourselves back on track. So while I was in the spiritual direction program, I met Matt Russell. I was getting towards the end. I was 2.5 years in, and I met Matt. And at this point, I was like, I love the spiritual direction program. I went into it, just knowing wholeheartedly this is where I needed to be, but I still need a career. I still need to make money. And I was really conflicted at that time about what am I going to do, because spiritual directors primarily volunteer. So I didn't want to be, have a full-time job and do spiritual direction on the side. I've tried that before. And he asked me, how would it feel to stand in the deep river of yes? And what he did was allow me to walk through the door of just visualizing what it is my heart really wanted to do. And around that time, I also had an experience on the labyrinth. I went into the labyrinth wanting to pray for other people, and what I realized was I didn't have the energy to pray for other people. I began to understand the burden that I had myself, and that I was carrying too much to even carry somebody else's stuff. When I got into the middle of the labyrinth, I had this, voice say to me, voice inside my head say, stop focusing on what you don't want. Just focus on what you do want. And so I went home and I made a list of what I wanted, what my heart was really longing for. And I kept having to stop myself, because my brain is like, how do you make a business plan out of that? How are you going to generate income? And I'd be like, no, stop, just dream. So I kept writing what I really wanted. I had to stop myself over and over again, trying to figure out how I was going to generate funds for that. And then a few days later, I was browsing the United Way's website. I came across a couple of job offers, and one of them was the executive director of the Heinz Center, and another one was for another organization that I had worked with before. And so when I pulled up the job description for the Heinz Center, I read it, and I was struck by how similar it was to my list. So I went and got my list, and I looked at them together, and I was like, wow, that it's impossible that these could be so much in line. So I applied for the job. I applied for both jobs because I really didn't know if my lack of experience in the nonprofit sector was going to hinder me getting the job at the Heinz Center. But I applied for both. It was a long process, and in the meantime, my husband and I were trying to figure out financially how I was going to get through this long interview process. School's coming to an end. The job that I had in real estate and the apartment development, I was beginning to see that things were starting to slow, and so it was a time of real faith for me. I got about halfway through the process. I think I had a phone interview and a regular, in-person interview. I interviewed for the other job. I got an offer for the other job. I went to a supervision, which is when spiritual directors come together in a group and have group supervision. And you really have to be in a contemplative state, and my mind wasn't letting me do that. So I asked for an emergency spiritual direction session. And when I got in with this spiritual director, she asked me, have you gotten, you're obviously frustrated, have you gotten angry with God? And I was like, oh no, I haven't done that. And so she encouraged me to let it out and to get angry with God. So I went home and I took a bath, and I got really angry with God. And at that moment, what I heard was, you're not alone. You can, you're not small, and you're not alone. And so I had to remember to just put one foot in front of the other. And so one of the last things in this kind of sequence of things that happened during the interview process was I had to allow my husband to support me, which may seem kind of funny, but growing up, it was important that women don't rely on a man for finances or anything. This was the image that I got growing up, and so a lot of the pressure about spinning all the plates was because I always felt like I had to be self-sufficient financially. And so it got to this point in the interview process where I had to let go of that. And I actually had a spiritual direction session about that. And my spiritual director said, you need to let your husband support you. And I went home that day and never said anything to him. That day he came home and he said, I found a way for us to pay for you to keep going on this vision. And so that opened the door for me to turn down the other job and keep going. And so I got the job as the executive director of the Hines Center. And so I started in April, and this is the mission statement. The Bishop John E. Hines Center for Spirituality and Prayer seeks to facilitate knowledge of and relationship with God by nurturing the spirituality of cathedral parishioners and those who live and work in downtown Houston through spiritual practices, prayer, and opportunities for both Christian and interfaith lecture and conversation. I got to bring my skills in as designer and got in there in time to work on the design of the space. So the job really allowed me to wrap my arms around all of the experience, like the process that my friend Kathy took me through. Because I recognized, I was able to be grateful for bringing everything of who I was my entire life into this new vocation. I got to develop the program principles, which straight out of the mouth of Bill Curley, I think, is a combination of Richard Rohr's work, Cindy Wigglesworth's work, and nonviolent communication, in an attempt to connect what the community is longing for with the structure and framework so that we understand where we are on our spiritual journey. This gives us an opportunity to evaluate all the programming that we bring in to make sure that regardless of where anybody is on their spiritual journey, they'll be welcome and they'll have programming there. So what I've recognized since I started is that, we're never done with this work. I constantly have to remember that I'm not small and I'm not alone. I just wanted to share that with you and to give you all the opportunity to kind of see where the benefits of spiritual direction come in when people are able to help us slow down enough in our busy lives to hear where God may be working, to see opportunities, and to have faith to just put the next foot in front of the other, even if we don't know what's around the corner for us. So when we participate in spiritual practice together, when we meet with a holy listener, a spiritual director, we're more likely to sense the divine nudges in our lives. We're able to walk back into the river and take our place again where the world flows with us and we touch wholeness and everything belongs. So that's it. Does anybody have any? Yeah, Randy. How's it going? At the Hines Center, it's going really well. In fact, we start construction in a week. We're supposed to start a week from tomorrow. We have, I think we have over 35 applications for programs to teach there. We have 5 programs that are starting in the fall before construction's finished. We have mindful self-compassion, compassion cultivation training with Betty Adam. We have 2 family yoga days. One of them is going to support the Children's Miracle Network on their 27-day challenge. So we'll be taking donations for that, which will directly go to Texas Children's. And we're going to have a memoir writing workshop. That's an 8-week course to help people tell their story. And I could go on and on, but it's going really well. And I'll tell you that I walk out of meeting after meeting with this notion of, can God be this great that I get to do this work and be with these people who are doing the sacred's work and collaborating and co-creating something that's a response to the community's longing for depth and meaning in their lives. And teaching the Conspire class here definitely does those same things. And I'm just really grateful for the way Ordinary Life class and all the resources and the people have stepped in and helped me put one foot in front of the other to get where things are going right now. Anybody else? Yeah, Bruce. So the Hines Center is a ministry of Christ Church Cathedral, and it's a new concept where the center is in a building across the street from the cathedral in the old Wilson Printing Building by William Ward Watkin. And what we are doing currently is we have a community survey that we're doing where we're trying to find out when people want to use the space, whether it's lunch hour, after work, whatnot. I'm looking at it as we have 3 different markets: the cathedral parishioners, people who work downtown, and people who live downtown. And our operating hours at this point are set to be from 6:30 in the morning until 8 at night, or 8:30 at night. There's a large portion of the schedule will have yoga and Tai Chi classes, and as well as the other contemplative practices that we're doing. But I'm looking at breaking the schedule into 3 sections for those markets, seeing that they might use the building at different times. So we'll have classes for before work, lunch hour, and after work for the work downtown area. And then for cathedral members or people who are self-employed or retired, we're looking at the 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. area of schedule, thinking that people who would be driving into downtown and want to miss the traffic, that might be their time. And then on the weekends, there's kind of an overlap of all 3 markets. We're looking at doing a lot of multi-generational offerings as well, because as busy parents, keeping our kids busy, we rarely have opportunities to do things together. So that's why we'll do family yoga. We'll have some multi-generational spiritual practices and things like that. And so in looking at the schedule split up in those 3 times, we're using the Richard Rohr, My Story, Our Story, The Story, to analyze and be sure that in each of those time frames, we have a variety of offerings. And we're not assuming what people are seeking who are coming from working downtown or coming in the middle of the day. We want to make sure each time frame has a variety of offerings. Again, a lot of those things will happen on the weekends too. I am meeting regularly with Sean Fitzpatrick, the executive director of the Jung Center. So there's a lot of overlap there, and so we're kind of learning from some of their structure for that. Jenny Burgermeister of Jenny Yoga and Blue Tree Yoga is now our director of programming. So I have help starting on Wednesday. And the other thing that you asked about that I didn't answer yet is memberships. So we'll have We'll have an opportunity for people to drop in for classes and not have a regular membership fee. So people could drop in for whatever they're interested in. We'll have a second tier of memberships where there'll be a monthly membership charge, but that will get you certain introductory classes and also get you a spiritual advisor meeting regularly, so that acts kind of like a college advisor. So they can sit down with you with our course offerings and lectures that are coming up and help identify which things are in line with where you are in your spiritual journey and what you're seeking. And then we'll also have a third tier of donor type members, and we'll have a specific package for them of benefits. And then we'll also have program sponsors. We're looking at doing biannual open house, so people can come. We have a labyrinth. So we have a permanent labyrinth inside. We have an art studio for sacred art, and we have the movement studio for yoga, tai chi, sacred dance, 2 spiritual direction lounges, and a couple of conference rooms. But we're going to have some open studio time for the labyrinth space and the art studio space that people can drop in and do on their lunch hour or after work. Yeah, so this is one of the parking. So the cathedral owns a parking garage next to the diocese, and so we'll have spaces there, and it's yet to be determined. I'm hoping we need extra parking, hoping we have so many people coming that we need extra parking. But that's another thing that I've been studying with that schedule is when people are coming. If they're walking from their offices, they won't need the parking. But on the weekends, the parking garage has a lot more spaces, and that's when our bigger events are going to be. So it'll be interesting to see if those things line up, or if we need to look at additional parking options. Anybody else? All right. Well, thanks for hearing this part of the journey, and for being a place where it was safe for me to take these steps. So remember, when you leave, you carry precious cargo. So watch your step. See you next time.